Um, this is the first Sunday of Advent, and I want to start with something that as we lean into Advent toward Christmas, I want to start with something that we typically don't think about or talk about much when we tell these stories today. And to do that, begin with that, I want to start with Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 9, and read that. I'm going to be reading that out of the Message, and it just turns the prism on it a bit and gives us a different perspective, I think, of this story that a lot of us have heard over and over and over and over again. And this might give us a new window to look through it. From Matthew chapter 2, starting with verse 1. And after Jesus was born in Bethlehem village, Judah territory, this was during Herod's kingship, a band of scholars arrived in Jerusalem from the east. They asked around, well, where can I find and pay homage to the newborn king of the Jews? We observed a star in the eastern sky that signaled his birth, and we're on a pilgrimage to worship him. When word of their inquiry got to Herod, Herod was terrified. And not Herod alone, but most of Jerusalem as well. Herod lost no time. He gathered all the high priests and religion scholars in this city together and asked, where is this Messiah supposed to be born? And they told him, Bethlehem, Judah territory. The prophet Micah wrote it plainly. It's you, Bethlehem, in Judah's land, no longer bringing up the rear. From you will come the leader who will shepherd, rule my people, my Israel. Well, Herod then arranged a secret meeting with the scholars from the east, pretending to be as devout as they were. He got them to tell him exactly when the birth announcement star appeared. Then he told them this prophecy about Bethlehem and said, go find this child. Leave no stone unturned. As soon as you find him, send word, and I'll join you at once in your worship. Right. This is the word of God for the people of God. I wonder if you just take a moment of silence with me. Sometimes I find silence is it's a time to breathe. Our lives get hectic, and probably no more hectic than holidays, and sometimes it's nice just to take a deep breath and locate ourselves in this space and get a sense of breathing in the grace of God. So let's take a moment of silence. As you breathe in, give God thanks for all the things going on in your life and God's grace that covers it all. And breathe out that grace to those around you, maybe to those sitting next to you. Maybe breathe out this grace to this city, to our country, to our world. Thank you, Lord. And now may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts in this space be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. And everybody said, amen. So this Advent, we're spending a little time with characters, I think, that rarely get top billing in the Christmas story. People who were drawn into the birth of Jesus in ways they never expected, for sure, and in ways that I think we often overlook. And today we're going to talk about someone you definitely won't find in your nativity set. There's not going to be any talk about Mary or Joseph today. No shepherds, no magi, We're going to talk about Herod. I know that must excite you. Just Herod today. Herod the Great, as he's known. Herod the paranoid. Herod the violent. Herod, the are you serious? He's part of the story guy. You won't find Herod as a figurine hovering in the background next to the sheep in any nativity set. Though, if you ever do, please text me, because I definitely would love to see that. And I think in some ways it's unfortunate, because the truth is, as Matthew tells us, Herod belongs in Christmas. Herod belongs in the story. Not because we want to put him at the center of everything, but because I think that if we leave him out, we actually lose sight of the power of the Advent promise that Christ is coming to meet us right where we are. Oh. Does it say that somewhere up here? Right where we are. Not where we want to be, or not where we pretend to be, but right where we are. I think Matthew could have told this story without Herod. The other gospel writers tended to tell the story a little bit differently without Herod, but he didn't. And maybe that is a gift to us as we look back on his life a little bit, and we look back at what that means in terms of how we understand this Advent story, this Christmas story. So if you don't mind, I want to give you, I think I'm going to give you 3 reasons today, okay? 3 reasons that we might want to put Herod back in Christmas, okay? 3. You ready? All right. You guys ready? Over here? Okay. Okay, so the first reason is really simple. If we leave Herod out of the story, if we don't talk about his part of the story, we miss the shocking contrast between Herod and Jesus. So can I give you just a little bit of history here on Herod? Okay. So before this star appears, as we read in the story, and before the angels sing, and before Mary actually wraps Jesus up, the baby Jesus up in these swaddling clothes, Herod has already shaped the world that Jesus is born into. And he shaped it in a powerful way. His shadow actually falls over the entire region into which Jesus is born. So some of you may know the author Philip Yancey, but he describes the neighborhood that Jesus grew up in like this. He said it was a succession of great empires tramped through the territory of Israel as if wiping their feet on the vaunted promised land. Takeover after takeover. Violence, violence, violence. Cruelty. Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks. Then a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes, the Jews' worst villain until Hitler. He desecrated the temple and terrorized the Jewish people. Then Rome happened, crushing Israel's independence. And finally, as part of Rome, Herod's puppet king was part of all of that oppression. But here's the thing. Herod is kind of a walking contradiction. So on one hand, Herod built cities. He did magnificent things. You may know this from your history. He built aqueducts and fortresses. He actually rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem to be this sort of jaw-dropping grand display of beauty. During a famine, Herod melted down his own gold in order to feed the people. He even canceled taxes. Imagine that. Canceled taxes to relieve the burden of his subjects. But beneath all that beauty and power was this deep sort of violent paranoia. Herod eliminated anyone he perceived as a threat. That's who he was. You know, he killed his own wife. He killed his mother-in-law. And he killed 3 of his sons. because in some way they were perceived as a threat. Caesar Augustus said once famously, "It is safer to be Herod's pig than his son." So as Herod aged, he became even more unstable. At one point, he ordered Jerusalem's most respected citizens to be executed upon his death. So when he died, he wanted Jerusalem's respected citizens to be killed at the same time. Why? Just to ensure that there would be people who were in mourning, because nobody would be mourning him. I think as history goes, that didn't happen. But that was what he wanted. So actually now, you understand, when word reaches him that there is this newborn king has been born, he reacts exactly as you might expect. With fear, paranoia, and violence. Herod's world is one where power is taken, where power is hoarded, where power is protected at any cost, no matter who it hurts. And then into that world, Jesus is born. That's the world in which Jesus is born. Not in a palace, not into comfort, not into stability, but into poverty, into vulnerability, into political tension, into danger. That's the world he was born into. Everything about Jesus' birth is something like a protest against Herod's way of being in the world. That's why Matthew includes it in his story. Herod is one who clings to power. Jesus empties himself of power. Herod demands loyalty. Jesus offers sacrificial love. Herod takes a life to protect his throne, kills in order to protect his throne, his rule. Jesus lays down his life to set others free. And in what we now call the Magnificat, you know, that song that Mary sings in, is it Luke chapter 1? Before he arrives, you get this sort of encapsulation of this. God has scattered the proud, pulled the powerful down from their thrones, and lifted up the lowly. That is her song of her son's birth. If we forget about Herod, we forget about how radical Jesus' arrival really is. Okay, you still with me? With me? All right. But there's a second reason, okay? I've got three. The second reason to keep Herod in Christmas, and maybe this is one that's a little bit harder to swallow. I think that if we edit Herod out of the story, we actually risk shrinking the scope of God's redemption. We shrink it. I'm not saying that Herod's actions are excusable. They were horrific, and the evil of it sort of has all these real consequences. There were real wounds and real trauma, and yet the gospel insists that God's redeeming love is not small, it's not narrow, it's not limited to the people that we have put on our nice list. The scandal of God's grace is that the love of God reaches even the people we may have written off as unredeemable. Even people like Herod. I got to be honest, even when I say that, I feel my own defenses going up. I think about, really, Herod? Surely not. And I can think of some other people in my mind. I think, surely not. And then I feel that, hear that inner voice sort of kick in that says something like, hey, Taylor, who made you judge of divine grace? I feel that tension. I guess, the truth is that maybe like you, I've seen God transform lives that I would have bet money that were beyond hope. I've seen that. People who've done really sort of just awful things, harmful things, people whose choices have devastated others and even devastated themselves, and yet people who came at some point to the end of themselves and found God waiting there. I've sat with people who believed that the worst thing they ever did made them unreachable, that they were somehow beyond the grace of God. I've seen the shame on their faces, the kind that makes you sort of wonder if you could ever be made whole again. And I've watched God meet them anyway. And to be honest, I've needed that kind of grace myself on more than one occasion. Maybe you have too. God so loved the world, John 3:16 says. Not the good parts of the world, not the nice parts of the world, not the easy parts of the world, the world. The cosmos, the whole dang thing. No one is beyond the reach of God's love. And maybe, just maybe, I think Matthew keeps Herod in the story so that none of us get to say, you don't get to say, I don't get to say, nobody gets to say that when they look at someone, surely not him. Certainly not her. Surely not me. Nothing and no one is God forsaken. It's hard to get our heads around. Not Herod, not your neighbor, not a person who hurts you, not the part of yourself that you hope no one else sees. Divine grace is as ubiquitous as light. It gets into every crack. It spills over into every boundary, and it reaches places that we would not go. And friends, I think that is very good news. Should we choose to receive that? Which leads me to one more reason Herod should be in the story or belong in Christmas. I think Herod actually keeps the story honest, right? You can probably tell where I'm going with this, but I think keeping him as part of Christmas reminds us that pain is part of the story. It's part of Jesus' story, and it's a part of our story. Your story is about pain. It has pain in it. My story has pain. We all got pain. And Jesus wasn't born into a world of twinkle lights and chestnuts roasting and families in matching flannel pajamas. Although that's cool too. He was born into a world of fear, of oppression, of violence, of this sort of deep aching and longing. Isaiah calls it a land of deep darkness. And the people living in that darkness weren't asking for much. They were just asking just for a little bit of light, just a pinhole of light. Just enough hope to keep them going, just some sign that God had not given up on them. Just a little bit. And in that place, in that darkness, the story is that Christ comes. I think this matters because so many of us enter this season with mixed emotions. And some love Christmas. Just absolutely love it. The music, the lights, the cookies, the caroling, all of it. But for others, and maybe I see this a lot because I'm a pastor, but this time of year has a way of heightening people's grief. It highlights loneliness, or it stirs up this longing for what once was. or what we hope to be. You know that song, I hear it in the coffee shop all the time. It's the most wonderful time of the... I like that song, actually. But the truth is, for some of us, yeah, it is. But for others, it's not even close. It's hard. I think some of us, walked in here today hoping no one would ask us how we're doing. Because we're not sure how to answer that question anymore. Some of us came in with a smile that may feel heavier to hold than the grief beneath it. And some of us are doing everything we can just to hold things together for everyone else. And it's exhausting. And keeping Herod in Christmas, I think, gives us permission to tell the truth. To say, look, this is hard. To be able to say to someone, I'm not okay right now. I need someone to sit with me in the dark. Herod keeps Christmas grounded in reality and reminds us, Christ doesn't wait for the perfect circumstance. This is the good news. Christ doesn't wait for us to get our act together. That's good news. And Christ doesn't come when everything is bright and shiny. Christ comes, listen to this, because we are in the dark. Christ comes because we are in pain. Christ comes because we all are longing for just a little bit of light. That's what Advent is about. The God who shows up right where we are, not where we should be, not where we pretend to be, but where we are. And maybe that's exactly what somebody here today needs to hear. Not so much answers, but just the reminder that God is not allergic to your darkness. God is already moving towards you with the light of Christ. So I want to suggest we put Herod back in Christmas. Not because we want to just, not because it's sort of a bummer and I'm trying to depress people, but or we want to focus on the darkness, but I think because we want to see the light for all that it really is. And Herod reminds us of that. The power, the presence, the grace, the hope, the peace, the love of what Christ brings. So if you're interested in a little take-home, and I know some of you aren't, but if you are, here's a question to carry with you this week, okay? Maybe just think about this week. Where in your life do you need to remember that Christ is meeting you right where you are? Simple as that. And that light still shines even there. Where in your life do you need to remember that Christ meets you where you are and that light still shines? Because the promise is still true. The light shines in the darkness. And the darkness cannot, will not, and has not overcome it. To me, that's pretty good news. You?